Hi, this is Kirsten, and good afternoon. Uh, for those of you who are having lunch right now, thank you for taking time to join your day. And if you aren't having lunch, how come? It's a good time to just take a break. So thank you for attending this webinar on successful negotiation. In some ways, this is a follow-up to the previous one on collaboration, in that I am entirely basing and stealing this from a set of trainings and kind of a skills workbook, if you will, that was created by Dave Piercy specifically for advocates. And it's set up as a 3-day training. I have, in fact, attached that to go out to all of you along with this PowerPoint. If you attended the collaboration webinar, you got it at that time, but it's also attached to go out again. That has the full training, so you can, with the trainer's notes and everything. So this is actually a great toolkit that you could take and do with your staff, do with teams of volunteers, whoever, to kind of share the skills. Share the skills. That was the idea. Share the skills. So I'm not stealing. I'm just doing what I'm supposed to do with it. And the development of that was actually piloted here in Iowa when she was working on it. And it's something that sits around in my electronic files, if you will, for a long time. And then I remember it and I do something with it, and then it sits there for a while, and it really needs to be out there where folks can have access to it. So it's all good stuff, and it never really grows old because there's always times when we need to be doing our collaborating and negotiating. So just get us going here. My first question for you is this one right here. How comfortable are you when you're in a situation where you have to negotiate, whether that is in your work life with a coworker or a person from another agency, or even if it's your personal life, next time you have to go out and buy a car or rent an apartment or something. I'll give you some time to actually respond. And yeah, it's everything from I can't stand it, I hate it, yuck, to love it, it's great, makes me feel alive. There we go. Now people are starting to vote. They're like, wait a minute, I was trying to eat. You mean I have to do something in the middle of this? Yes, you do. A third of you have voted now. Let's see if we can get for half. I can be an auctioneer, right? Can I have half? Can I have 50%? Come on, can I have 50%? Who's going to give me 50%? I need a couple more people voting. I've got 50%. Can I get 75%? Woohoo! Oops. That's not what I meant to do. Come on. Hit share. Okay. Well, I can't see it, but hopefully you can see it. So I have some of you thinking, do I have to do this? And some of you saying, yeah, it's it's awesome. I love it. In which case, I think I'll just turn the webinar over to you, and you can finish this. And some of you in kind of where I'm at, which is, you know, it's okay. I feel confident, but I don't really like doing it. And fortunately, nobody absolutely can't stand it, which is good, because there's no point in getting out of the gate already feeling like you don't have any confidence and that it's something you hate to do. So, little case studies. County Sheriff and 3 municipal police departments are forming a law enforcement committee on domestic violence. Your domestic violence program is not invited to be a member. When you ask, you're told that this is just for law enforcement. So, what I want you to think about is, okay, that's a pretty firm no. How would you respond if you were that program? Is that a table that you want to be at? Is it a table that you need to be at? And kind of what influences that decision? Is it a matter of how much trust you've already developed with those departments? Is it a matter of maybe particular personalities? It depends on who ends up on that committee, whether you feel like it's something that you can just leave be or you really want to push for. Is it a matter of how other parts of the system are functioning? Like, okay, since we have such good relationships with the prosecutor's office and with our hospitals or whoever else, it's okay if this particular one is not so good. Does it matter how the community coalition is functioning? And if all of those, depending on all of those things, would you want to and how would you negotiate this, no, this is just for law enforcement? So there's lots of times, as I said, when we have to negotiate, when we're creating referral systems for our clients, absolutely. You know, how is this going to work? What kind of response can we anticipate? What are you going to expect from us? What are you going to need from us? How can we smooth and close any gaps? Which goes into creating services with other agencies. Maybe there's a gap and you decide, hey, we're going to do this thing together. We're going to provide this group together. We are going to set up this option for our mutual clients together. And that goes right into working on collaborative projects, whether it's that, you know, maybe that law enforcement committee is putting together some kind of prevention project or you know, PR event, and you're thinking, do we want to just say okay and they're going to run with it, or is that something we really want to collaborate with them on and get ourselves onto that table? When negotiation is successful, there's some key aspects to it. People know what their interests are. They know what their needs and their wants are. So there's clear and transparent individual and group goals. Even if the individual goals aren't all the same, there are at least a few key group goals that are all in the same ballpark. Another one is that you negotiate with the person or the people who actually has power to decide and to implement what's decided. You can do all kinds of negotiation, but unless it's the person there who can make things happen, it can sometimes be a frustrating waste of time. People are open and willing to find the solution, to coming up with an agreement. It isn't about beating the other party. It isn't about winning. And certainly, while it's important to get different perspectives, that's different than having a complaint session. So you can be direct and you can say I statements, you can say what the concerns are, the barriers, the challenges, and that's different than complaining about something without really having that openness to move forward. People are willing to be influenced by another. Again, it's helpful, and this kind of was in the collaborative mindset webinar, this idea of why would reasonable, rational people have this approach or this perspective, being able to kind of take a step back and widen the pool of knowledge between you and other folks, and hear how something is affecting their job, or hear what their financial pressures or their policy pressures are that are guiding their choices. So kind of that step down, step back, and being willing to hear and being willing to make adjustments for other people's perspectives and positions. So that requires that all parties are feeling heard and that effective listening can occur. And of course, there's the whole thing of respect is like oxygen, and you're not aware of it until it's gone. So there needs to be that absence of blaming and personal attack. When I talk about this, what I'm reminded of is when I was growing up, one of my father's best friends had been the Minister for Education in Afghanistan before the Russians invaded and took over. And I remember very powerfully him talking one evening about how he had been approached to go to, as somebody that they wanted to be engaged in peace talks. They wanted him to go to France and be engaged in these peace talks. And let's just say he was not in a position where he was willing to be influenced by the Soviet Union, where he was not willing to listen to anything they had to say, and he pretty well put it out there when he said, if I was across the table from those people, though he didn't use the word people, I would use the opportunity to kill them. It was that blatant. And so anytime I think of negotiation and peace talks and everything else, I always think of Abdul Qayyum and his stance on negotiations with the Soviet Union about their invasion. Okay, moving right along, out of my memories here. What makes negotiation successful? Civility and respect, as I said, win-win. Having a clear outcome and knowing exactly what those terms are. Everyone knows what they have agreed to, knows what the plan is, what the steps are, what parts they are responsible for. All of that is what makes negotiation successful. So having that follow-up email or contract or something that has all the terms laid out again and timelines and everything else can often be the key to that negotiation actually working, as opposed to, yeah, do you remember when we sat there around the table and we all shook hands and agreed and then nothing happened? That's not actually a successful negotiation. Sometimes that is simply going along to get along and people parting without ever actually having any interest in following through. So you have to have a follow-up to see that the agreement is carried out. Parties need to be committed, and of course everyone is still speaking together when you're done negotiating. So let's try another idea. Another one. A board member of your agency has received a complaint about a lack of staff, quote, professionalism. So the board has gotten together and they decided to implement a dress code for staff. So no jeans, flip-flops, sleeveless garments, t-shirts, skirts above the knees, shorts, whatever might be involved in their idea of a dress code. So I kind of so far talked about negotiation outside the agency, but there's going to be situations like this where you're negotiating within your organization. I mean, is this something that your staff wants to have input in? Is this something that staff should have input in? And then, again, a thought question for you is, how would you go about negotiating the parameters of a dress code? You know, should there be a dress code? What should it look like? Should it be the same for everyone? Who gets to be engaged in that discussion? How is the staff going to find and leverage whatever power they might have with a body, the board, that is in a position of power over them. So it's one thing from agency to agency where presumably, hopefully, you are matched as peers coming to a table to negotiate. But how does it look different when you are in a different position of power from the people that you're negotiating with? Oh, for heaven's sake. Excuse me while I try and do my technology here. That's better. So assuming that even if you're saying to yourself, well, for my job as an advocate, it's not my role to go out and negotiate with the police department or the housing authority or whoever. Somebody else does that. Chances are there are other negotiations you have been involved with. So here's the next poll. What kinds of internal negotiations have you had to negotiate personnel policies? Have you had a voice in that discussion? What about how you actually do your work around either the advocacy practice? When and how and under what circumstances do you transport clients, for example? Or client policies, if you have funds available for client assistance, how is that divvied up? How do you, what do you go through to actually provide that to the client? Have you had any role in setting your salary, what parts are part of your job description or changing job descriptions? And you have a say in where and how you work, how your office is set up, what team you work on, how you split things up with a project you're working with coworkers. And with any luck, you can check as many of those as you want. So I've only have a couple of you having voted. There we go, boom. The system just made a huge leap, so it must take a while for it to all process through. So I've got folks absolutely being involved in those discussions around policies that impact the clients and how you're interacting day to day with clients and with your coworkers and how you actually get the job done between you. And then a little bit less so on the other things, on personnel and advocacy and salary stuff, where perhaps you're negotiating instead of sideways or negotiating downwards, where perhaps you're trying to negotiate upwards, speaking to places where there's more power over you. And that doesn't particularly surprised me, and that's one reason why there are other decision-making processes out there that are available. Again, I don't think we can divorce this from at least mentioning issues around power. So there are times when negotiation doesn't work, when you've tried it and it doesn't work, or you already know that none of those things that I listed that are required for successful negotiation, you already know at the outset that those elements are not there, are not going to be there. People aren't going to be willing to be heard. There isn't a win-win mindset. You know, you already know you're working from a different place, and that's when you might take a look at some of these other things. Maybe this is a situation that requires collective action. We saw the amazing thing that happened when the African American students, just in the last week, the football team went on strike and got a response from the university where maybe we actually have to address racism on campus. And it wasn't until really the money was impacted that they actually had power. So, you know, in terms of looking and saying where do we have power, and it's in the football team, it's in the money. That was a great way of harnessing power and getting some movement. So strikes, demonstrations, things like that may be an avenue that sometimes as advocates we may resort to. Mediation is a process where you have a third party, a trained facilitator that can come in and help the two parties to a negotiation walk through some kind of mutual agreement. Having a different person in the room can change the dynamics. It can help to even out some of the power differential, and it may be one way that you end up going at some point, again, internal or external to the organization. Arbitration, very similar, except it's kind of a non-legal process with somebody who makes the decision. They hear both sides. It's kind of like a step in between mediation and litigation, because litigation is the fallout. We're going to settle it in court. That's how this is going to be settled. And unfortunately, a lot of times that is where we are able to make change, is finally in the courtroom with, if nothing else will work, that is the court of last appeal, if you will. Okay, all of this is great, all fine, Kirsten, but how do you actually do it? So I'm going to give you a step-by-step negotiation method. I'm not saying that it will always be comfortable. I'm not saying it will always work, but I am saying that sometimes if you can take a step back and strategically plan, that you might be more likely to end up with successful negotiations than without. And for me, that means I like to do things consciously, know where I'm at, know what I'm trying to do, and as I said, do it strategically. And so we're going to kind of go through, here's the steps: the question, the situation, what each party wants and needs, coming up with answers and solutions, developing that action plan, and then assessing what happened. And the first step is really the question. And the way that the problem is framed, or the issue, can completely change the process and the end result. Sometimes framing the question can be the hardest part. Sometimes finding a question that can bring both parties to the table, that is the issue. That is the thing that sets the tone. The question can't be, how can I make you do what I want, essentially. So you're looking for, how can we, whatever that mutual goal is, whatever the thing that will be beneficial to both, how do we, what is the best way to, even having a time where you just stop and figure out what those goals are and see if you can find a mutual one, can be helpful even to find the right question. This isn't part of it wasn't part of a negotiation, but it was part of a community audit that happened, somebody out there probably knows, but at least 10 years ago in Davenport, where they were working with Ellen Pence on the Child Protective Services piece, and they were looking at, they did a community audit, and the first piece that they did was they came to a question of not, how do we all work together, but the question ended up being framed as, how does each part of the system, or how do we support survivors, the non-offending parent, how do we support their relationship with the child? Because all of our research, we know that the best thing for children who are exposed to people who are using those power and control tactics, one of the best and most important things for them to heal from that experience is the strength of their relationship with that non-offending parent. So how do we strengthen the relationship with that non-offending parent every step of the system? And by framing the question that way, it didn't make any particular person defensive or any part of the system defensive. It was in pursuit of a common goal from everybody. It was a really brilliant piece, I think, of collaborative work, is coming to that question, figuring out, doing an assessment of what's going on, and then negotiating how they were going to make change in their community. So what's that question? The hardest part. What is the situation? Again, adding to the pool of knowledge that all parties have. This is where I think of the blind man and the elephant story. I only have one part of the elephant. I need to understand your part of the elephant. That will help me understand why something is important to you as we negotiate. That will help me to understand your barriers and your challenges. I don't know if you're familiar with the idea of a SWOT analysis, but if you've ever done any strategic planning, this has probably been a part of it at the initial stages. So what are the strengths? SWOT just stands for what are the strengths, the positive things that are internal to whatever your situation or goal is, the weaknesses, which is the negative parts, opportunities, those are external, and threats that are external. So you might even want to use a specific tool like a SWOT analysis to do this kind of, let's just step back and get a big picture and give everybody a chance to have a voice in this and provide what they know. Let's see their perspective. And sometimes using specific tools can help take some of the personal stuff out. Another thing is what the next step is needs and wants. So what's the minimum parameters of a successful solution for you? That would be kind of the needs. And then the dream version is the wants. Everybody having a chance to express their needs and wants helps really solidify and clarify the positions. So what I want is, what I have to have is, that's my bottom line. So it can help you to narrow down not only hearing from other people what really matters, but also having to say what really is my bottom line, what's most important. I'm trying to think of an example. So let's say that my partner and I are negotiating where to go on vacation, and I want to go to Minneapolis, and he wants to go to Memphis, and I could say, well, I want to go to Minneapolis is the solution. That's what I want. But if we break that down, well, what I need, my bottom line is I need it to be somewhere that's affordable. I don't like driving in cities, so and for whatever reason, I'm not so scared of Minneapolis, but other cities freak me out. So I need to be affordable. I need to be in driving range. I need to be somewhere I'm not scared of driving. So I need to be comfortable. I don't want to waste a lot of my days driving. As far as my wants, I want to go to an art museum. Well, if he was coming up with needs, I know he would say, well, he needs it to be affordable, but as a musician, as a displaced Southerner, he really needs to be able to see some live music and feel like he's gotten out of the Midwest, to feel like he's had some kind of a vacation. And those are kind of needs, bottom line. Well, okay, now, oops. Now that we know that, what would the answer or the solution be? Well, we could end up deciding to go to Kansas City, and he would agree to do all the driving around Kansas City because that would make me uncomfortable. Kansas City in particular is a city that I get very nervous driving in. And I would agree to see a show and eat barbecue. And, you know, as far as blues and barbecue, Kansas City really ranks right up there. We can both be happy. So there may be more than one place to choose from, maybe more than one vacation spot, maybe more than one solution in whatever situation you're negotiating. And that meets both of our minimums. It wasn't what either one of us originally thought about, and it wouldn't be what each one of us would have come up with necessarily on our own, but by negotiating out, we came up with something that meets both of our minimum needs and even some of our wants. So, action plan, what will be done, by whom, by when, what resources are needed. I think that often the two pieces when people are doing strategic planning that they sometimes forget is the by whom, as in who's responsible. Pretty good at figuring out the steps, pretty good at putting it on a timeline, but then attaching a name to that and saying, oh, hey, I actually am going to do that, or so-and-so is going to be the person that's voluntold that they are going to be doing that. That piece sometimes falls through the woodwork. And then another piece that falls through the woodwork is what resources are needed. Is this going to need money? Is this going to need staff time? Is this going to need a partnership with some other third party to this negotiation? Is this going to need, who knows, what is it going to need? A duck and 3 turtles? I don't know, but you got to know what resources are needed to make sure that action plan works. And then another part that's often forgotten is the assessment. How will you know it's that it's actually successful? And what would success feel like? What would it look like? You know, so we go to Kansas City. We both feel that we actually had enough of a vacation outside of our regular lives, that we had fun, that it was a break, that we got away, and yet it didn't break the bank, and it wasn't stressful, no anxiety, etc. That's what success would look like. So when and by what means will you assess the outcome? Well, if I was going on that vacation, I would want to probably assess in the middle of it, so I didn't run out of time in case I wanted to change something in the middle of it, like, oh, let's not go and do that, let's do something else this evening. And certainly when we came back, did that work? Did not? Is that someplace we want to go back to? So, case study. There is a transitional housing agency in your community. It houses single individuals. You approach them about also housing families. They say they aren't equipped to accommodate children, and besides, housing survivors of domestic abuse puts their other clients at risk of violence. Well, if you think about possible questions, if you ask, well, what's needed to change your policy of excluding children? It might be helpful to manipulate them by focusing on the poor, unhomed children, but I don't think that particular question is going to get very far. What would it take for you to be able to expand services? That's probably a better question. It's more general. You're asking for specifics. You're asking to get information from them, expand the pool of knowledge. How can we work together to increase transitional housing for battered women and their children? I think I like that question best because that one is focused on mutual goals. It assumes that you're kind of both in this together and that you both have to change and do work to get to some kind of a mutually helpful outcome. So when you move to the situation portion of negotiating with that other agency, well, there's limits. You know, there are barriers in funding, there's barriers in facilities. They're saying, hey, all we've got is single bedroom apartments. We truly don't have the capacity to house families. Maybe their staff is scared of the issue of domestic violence. It seems like it would that it would bring in all kinds of other conflicts and police involvement and danger to themselves and to other people that they're not comfortable with. Like, hey, we're already just barely managing the loss and trauma that we already have going on here, and you want to add another layer? I don't think so. However, there's also families in need of housing, and you know that as a housing agency, this is one of their primary motivators, and they are in existence in order to help people in this area. So you're on the same page as far as your ultimate goal of making sure that everyone has a safe roof over their head, right? And certainly there's a lack of affordable housing in your community. I know that because there's a lack of affordable housing in every single community. So what does each want and need? You want to provide safe housing for your clients, right? And the other thing is, how many of their clients are already at risk that they're just not aware of because of the ubiquity of domestic violence? Sure, you may have, you may only be housing a single person in your apartment or whatever that they've got, but that doesn't mean that that person is free from intimate partner violence. Maybe the partner just isn't living with them at the time. Maybe they are in hiding from their partner. Who knows? So some possible things that you might come up with. Are there funding possibilities that could create family housing at a different site? They would be pursuing that. They could partner with you. You could provide DV training to their staff. Help them with, as I said, screening of the clients they're already serving, and they might suddenly find there's a whole lot more going on than they had ever imagined. Is there a way that you could do, you know, create family housing with them, have a team with the domestic violence advocate, housing caseworker, both of you working with clients at the same time to increase safety? And some of these can happen whether or not they actually end up changing so that they are providing services to your clients right there on site as they, you know, in the situation they already had previous to this. So then you would need an action plan, researching grants, joint staff meetings, joint training. Maybe it's a matter of hiring a housing advocate to work with that transitional program. You would need a strategic plan with timelines and duties and who's responsible for what steps, all of that good stuff. And then assessment out of this negotiation, maybe weekly meetings during the initial phase. While you're, hey, we found this great grant opportunity, or hey, there's this, you know, there's a duplex here that's available, and we can't afford to rent it out. Can you rent it out? Can you, you know, if you would do case planning with us, with those folks, great. Maybe there's monthly meetings thereafter. Maybe there's supervision meetings with housing teams from both agencies. All kinds of ways that assessment could be worked into that kind of situation. Now, that example, I recognize, sounds great, and it's big in terms of a major change in a relationship with another provider. Sometimes you are simply negotiating on the fly, and you're not going to have all of this time to strategically plan behind the scenes, what question should it be, and gather information and do all of that. Sometimes it's just you're sitting there in a meeting with somebody else and something comes up and you've got to just do it. So Your DVSA coalition is planning information sessions so survivors will know what to expect in protection order hearings. You're discussing where to hold those. Everyone says, hey, needs to be a separate room with babysitting during these sessions, and the location has to be near public transportation. Someone suggests the library, and the DV advocate says, nope, too public, perpetrators can come in, that's just not safe. Okay. Well, and then one of the attorneys says, well, wait a minute, these are information sessions. You can't keep the respondent out. This is information sessions about protection orders and what happens during the hearings. The session has to be fair and impartial. Then the Child Protection Services worker says, well, yeah, but safety really is a problem. I'd like to add that it's both safe for victims and fairness of the judicial process to our criteria for selecting a place. So the conversation is kind of turned to what is our goal, what are our needs, right? And that CPS worker did that. What's the goal? What's the needs? And then after kind of making a list, the coalition picks a place that everyone is comfortable using. So that was really hidden, negotiating on the fly. You know, the question being, how can we create a safe, fair setting to provide the public with information about protection order hearings, right? And the situation being, we know that there's a number of risks out there. There's safety risks for survivors. There's due process issues. There are, it has to be someplace that people can get to that's easily accessible. We have to have childcare, or, you know, folks just aren't going to come. So that kind of goes into what has to be there. And then solutions, well, the library didn't work. Who knows what else they came up with. Maybe there's a community center, maybe the city hall, maybe the courthouse, someplace that's on a bus route, has a spare room, and feels relatively safe. When I think about what probably contributed a lot to this successful negotiation, I think it is the replacing no with the term yes and. That verbal trick, if you will, I don't know what else to call it, verbal skill, verbal prompting. By instead of saying no to things, you say yes and. You're not putting people on the defensive. You're simply adding another piece. So it's kind of like the whole issue of having rigidity meeting rigidity, and you don't get anywhere. So rather than meeting rigidity, the no, with another no, instead saying yes and actually goes a long way in a lot of conversations and negotiations, because you're accepting the other person's position, information, challenge, you name it, and then going okay, and then you're again adding to the pool with something else. Yes, that's important. And so yes, I want to go on vacation. Yes, I do. And it needs to be somewhere where I feel comfortable driving and doesn't cost me an arm and a leg. So in 45 minutes of me just blabbing, I can't turn you into awesome negotiators. All I can hope to do is give you some step-by-step, a pattern, a plan to stop and think through it strategically. It takes a lot of practice, obviously, before it becomes comfortable. And again, you can be brilliant at something. It doesn't necessarily mean it always stays comfortable or that it always works. What the actual curriculum that this came from it is set up to be a practice it in real life. And there are scenarios in there about going in and negotiating with the judicial system. Here's the scenario, now practice it. And people can take on the roles. You're the judge, and you're an advocate, and you're so-and-so. And I would highly recommend that as something to do at a staff meeting, to just work some of those skills. And just like you would exercise for a marathon, to take some time out to do some exercising for negotiations, and practice. Practice always maybe not makes perfect, but it makes better. And that is it. As always, I have recorded this, and I will get it up to YouTube. I am sending you all a certificate of attendance, the PowerPoint, and what I think is most important, the curriculum by Dave Piercy on collaboration and negotiation for advocates. And so with that, are there any comments or questions? Make sure I can see your hands if there are. If you don't feel like typing, I can unmute if you'd rather just speak to all of your peers. And that in that case, have a great long weekend if you are so fortunate as to have that. If you are not and you are going to be working, I hope that you have a quiet weekend, and even more than that, I hope that the folks that you're working with and working for have a quiet and peaceful long weekend and holiday, if Thanksgiving is something that they are celebrating. And presumably I will see most of you soon at some point, or at least see you next year. Have a great rest of the day. Bye-bye.